So greetings, hello, it's Dr. Thomas Daffern again here. An update from here at the Museum of the Muses, because we've had some very important events. I last spoke in response to the World Parliament of Religions in Toronto, but since then we've had two significant events really that I'm particularly interested in. One is the Paris Peace Forum, and I'm giving this kind of address to say thank you to all the people that came to Paris for this Paris Peace Forum, which was a unique event organised at the behest of President Macron of France. About 70 world leaders came, and people from all over the planet, many African nations, Asian, European, American. I'm still trying to get the list of those who actually came. We've all seen from the press and media that Putin was there and President Trump. I believe they had some useful bilateral discussions. I know that President Netanyahu was there from Israel. I wish that Mahmoud Abbas had come from Palestine. I'm not sure he actually made it. It would have been a great chance for those two to meet. So I think what Macron was trying to do with this was bringing this together in honour of the 100th anniversary of the ending of World War I. Here we are in 2018, 100 years after 1918. And Macron's speech, I think, was consummately, to the point. He was saying, look, nationalism brought us World War I. That's a fact. There are historians now poring over it. Was it the British Empire's desire to crush Germany? Two Scottish historians have found some new evidence in the archives that actually the British were seriously scared of Germany and engineered Germany into a trap by making what was really a local conflict between Serbia and Austro-Hungary over the assassination in Bosnia-Herzegovina in Sarajevo into a pan-European war. It was the British, according to this latest research from these Scottish historians, that engineered that. Now, I suspend judgment. I'm a trained historian. I'll need to look at the archives, the evidence. I don't know enough yet to know, but I think historians should really work on this. The origins of World War I is a hugely important topic. And if it turns out that it was the British, conspiring, then I think it's utterly shocking and deserves to be exposed. That's what historians are good at. We're the forensic doctors that examine the causes of conflict and war. And ever since Herodotus' time, that's been our primary job. I'm just about to publish a book on the causes of the events of 9/11. Again, I'm using the forensic skills I've learned as a historian to analyse in absolute micro detail what caused 9/11. Not the kind of events of the day and whether the official narrative is true. I leave that to David Ray Griffin and his team of experts who've gone into that in forensic detail. I'm interested in the bigger picture. I'm starting from the assumption that it wasn't 19 Al-Qaeda trained people run from a cave in Afghanistan, because the evidence, I think, has conclusively proved it wasn't that. So the only other thing for a historian to ask is, well, what was it? It was someone else and Al-Qaeda operatives. Who else? That's what I'm looking at. And I suspend judgment. There's about 20 possible hypotheses I've explored in the book. That level of detail also needs to be done on the causes of World War I. And it's not a finished thing. These wounds last. When I was a young man in my 20s, I nursed in Canada, in Alberta, with some wonderful gentlemen soldiers who'd fought in World War I. Scottish Canadians who'd gone out there, to build a better world. I remember a wonderful man called Mr. Bonthron, who was descended from King James I's wine master. Wonderful people, and a whole bunch of them. And they all were at the end of their lives in a veteran hospital, and I was their nursing orderly who used to play chess with them and, look after their daily physical needs. And often I'd have really amazing conversations with them at night. They'd tell me their life stories, tell me what it was like working on the front lines in World War I, and how horrendous it was, and how pointless, because they didn't have any personal animosity towards the Germans or the Austrians or whatever. And they said, Thomas, you're a historian. Go back to London and find out why it all happened. And that's kind of what I've been doing. That's why I launched my Peace Institute. So I think that Macron and his team in Paris, I don't know who were the intellectuals behind the setting up of this thing. I don't know if I indirectly had any role to play, because I wrote to Macron soon after coming to France, and I told him about my work as a global peace thinker. And I sent him details of our World Intellectual Forum that's been founded in India. I said, is this something that'd be interesting? Because soon after he became president, I sensed, here's a Frenchman with the gravitas and the intellect of that kind of Frenchman who realizes the responsibility of France. It's a country that has a duty to lead morally in the direction of peace, because it's been conquered, because it's been because of its revolutionary history. It has a duty to, I think, lead mankind in the direction of peace. And I think Macron realises that. So I was greatly moved when he, I think, rose to the challenge, organised this amazing event. It went on from the 11th to the 13th of November. It wasn't just for world leaders, it was also for thinkers, entrepreneurs, business leaders, movers and shakers, people like the head of the World Bank and the IMF, Lagarde, and all these people were there, discussing what can their organisations do for peace. Now, this is incredibly important. It's the first time. I've been asking for this for 20 years. Ever since I set up my institute at the University of London, I've been saying, when will the great movers and shakers of society, the top business people, realise they have to invest in peace instead of war? The backwardness of industry is shocking, because as long as there's an economic incentive to build bigger and better bombs, they're going to have an incentive to create wars and not solve them. We have to decouple industry and business from militarism. We have to put it into a whole new field called peace industry. And that's to do with the environment, it's to do with new engineering that can transform deserts into gardens. It's to do with food industry that can produce organic food for people at low cost. It's for building shelters where people are homeless. It's for bringing medicine to people that they can afford. That's all peace industry. That's peace business, and that's solving the needs of the quarter of the world's population that are extremely poor, and don't know where their next meal's coming from. That's what the peace business is. It's satisfying the needs of these people, over and above the elite arms industry types who are currently running the world. So what Macron was doing in this peace forum is saying to the world's global financial and business elites is, look, we need to get together on this. Because I think one thing is absolutely certain, is that whoever was ultimately behind World War I, and it wasn't just British bankers, I think that's the Scottish hypothesis. I think they were part of it, but it was a whole bunch of dominoes all collapsing at once. It wasn't just them. There were other financial interests. There were American bankers, German bankers. There's an absurd statistic that the armaments that were used in the first 3 years of the war were owned by a cartel that was co-owned by British and German and I think French capital. So the arms were being made by the enemy, literally, and they were making the profits. So, how bonkers is all that? What we need, therefore, to do is exactly what Macron did, is bring together these financial business entrepreneurial types and say, look, create us a peace industry, create us a peace, high-tech solution to the world's problems. The other danger that we're facing now is all the wonderful technology that we're using that means that people like me can go on YouTube and you can listen and so on. That's being misused for military and defence and security and false information, disinformation. There are information wars going on all over the place. And people are now hacking into each other's sites and destabilising the internet as a secure, safe platform for honest, truthful communication. So it's become securitized, militarized, etc. So we need to somehow bring peace back to the internet and to the IT industry. And there were lots of IT business leaders in Paris having discussions about how that can be done. I'm sure news will come out about their discussions. And it's incredibly important. We need a peace internet which can somehow filter out all the half-truths, untruths, and disinformation. So, and my role is simply as a kind of intellectual, a philosopher, someone that sees the bigger picture, the overview, and has been calling for a philosophy of peace for the last 10, 20 years. You know, that's what my PhD thesis is. Now, so I'm very excited. I'm pleased to be here just down the road from Paris. And this is going to be an annual thing. Again, I have to take my hat off to Macron and his team. Not only are they doing this a one-off, like, you know, the British did quite a good Olympics thing, and, you know, it was all great. James Bond coming from a helicopter with the Queen and all that stuff, you know. But that was a one-off. Macron's doing an annual thing to bring together these world movers and shakers to really think through how we're going to get peace on this planet. And that's so overdue, it's a joke, right? I'm not going to bother to just say I was a bit disappointed in Trump's behaviour, because you'll probably gather that I was disappointed at, you know, the behaviour of some of the people that came to the forum. They just didn't seem to understand what this was about. I think Trump felt out of his depth. You know, he is not an intellectual, that's fine. He is a businessman, so I think he should have been allowed to go and talk to the business people about peace. And that's why I've suggested that the Americans build this nonagon on top of the Pentagon. That's a business proposition for people like Trump. Even they can understand. Actually, that makes really good business sense. Let's build the new floor and let's dedicate that to peace. So instead of having the Department of War and Militarism expending trillions of dollars, let's give half to the Department of Peace on the top. That's a Leonardo da Vinci project. I think Trump would understand that, you know, but I haven't had a chance to put it to him yet. If anyone watching this knows Trump, please pass on the message and say he should have stayed at the Macron Peace Forum. Anyway, maybe next year, right? What I want to talk about now is I want to talk about something that's not really understood. I want to contrast that, right? The achievement of Macron and the French team in pushing for peace through that Paris Peace Forum, with an event that happened yesterday, like a couple of days later. So that was the 13th of November. Yesterday, the 14th of November, we had the statement by Theresa May and the kind of the deal about Brexit finally. You know, so what the British are doing at the moment is pulling out of the European Union, which is one of the international structures that is keeping peace in place around the planet. And there are so many complex causes why there was a tiny minority that voted in favour of Brexit in 2016, why many people's votes were not counted, such as my own, who voted to stay inside the European Union. And I think that the most British intellectuals, academics, scientists, philosophers, educated people are actually seriously in favour of our staying inside the European Union. And I make no apologies for being in that team. Sir Paul Nurse, the former president of the Royal Society, one of the leading scientists of Britain, has again and again said we must stay in. He organised a letter of, I think it was 60 eminent scientists, many of them Nobel Prize winners, saying Britain should stay inside the European Union. One of the things it does very well is it does scientific research on a pan-continental basis. So you can be a Frenchman, a Slovenian, a German, a Dutchman, a Norwegian, or whatever, and you will get funding from a central pot to research your latest theory or whatever. It's also good for the social sciences and the humanities and the arts. If I'm a young musician, I can go and play for a while in Dublin. I can learn ancient Irish music and learn Irish folk songs. Then I can go to Sweden or wherever else and learn theirs. And I think this coming together, it's an intellectual, spiritual, educational project, the European Union. And most people don't either understand that or appreciate it. When the Brexit document was finally released yesterday, and it's this, this has taken 2 years, the British and European Union have negotiated, I did a very quick search. I looked for the word culture anywhere in the document. What's the impact going to be on cultural relations? One of the groups that are really worried about Brexit are the museum specialists and the artists, the art world, the people that run the theatre companies, like the Royal Shakespeare Company and so on. Poets, because we get funding and support from being part of the European Union, and also the spiritual benefit of feeling that we're not at war anymore. You know, there was a generation in 1914, the poets went off to die, to die in the trenches, the war poets, which we all used to study in school when I was at school. They inspired me in my career as a poet. I don't want that to ever happen again. I want the poets of my children's generation and grandchildren's generation to be able to live in peace and write peace poetry, right? So I looked for the arts and I looked for culture in this entire 400-page document. And you know, the word isn't in there, not even once. It's all about trade and this and that regulation and ridiculous detail about business and trade and God knows what gobbledygook. You know, I'm not interested in that. I love Europe because I love Goethe, because I love Dante, because I love Racine, because I love, you know, the history of France and Italy, because I love Leonardo da Vinci and I love the Vatican Museum and I love Mozart and Beethoven. For me, Europe is a spiritual project, fundamentally and absolutely. And as a poet, as an artist, that's what I want to maintain. So the fact that the word culture and art wasn't even in there, I think is shocking. And it shows how ignorant the people are that put that document together. And I have to blame the British, because I'm sure their teams have, you know, said, we want to talk about this, etc., etc. The fact of the matter is that the cultural industries in Britain are shocked at Brexit, because they know that they are going to be decimated. You know, I'm a great lover of the museums of Britain. I've done exhibitions. I did one in Shrewsbury Museum about the 400th anniversary of the Battle of Shrewsbury with you know, 1403 and the it was a horrendous conflict. And I did a kind of peace exhibition there, co-curated it with Mary Napper, who ran the museum at Shrewsbury. And I worked in other museums around Britain. I'm somebody that used to be a devotee of the British Museum. I'd go in there every day when I lived in London to the British Museum reading room and was writing, you know, my early books. The museums are priceless, and yet they're not even mentioned in this document. You know, nobody cares about the actual intellectual, moral and spiritual consequences of Brexit. And the British cabinet, these people that are pushing for this, the Theresa May types, you know, they don't seem to have a cultural thought in their body. They're just like small-minded business type people that are thinking about profits and guarding their particular bank balances that are stashed offshore in the Isle of Man and so on. The Farages and the Aaron Banks people have all been exposed as actually pretty criminal. They're doing stuff that is actually now before the National Crime Agency in Britain. These are criminal business types that are destroying what is ultimately a cultural foundation. Now, if you don't believe me and don't understand what I'm talking about, you should do some research. You should study the history of Europe. You should study the history of the European Union and the history of the ending of World War II. That chaos, that catastrophe was so vast that the greatest thinkers of Europe, the greatest kind of centrist liberal democrats, leftists, visionaries, peace thinkers came together and said, we must never again have a war like this. We must build a permanent architecture. They borrowed some ideas from David Mitrani, who was at the Princeton Institute of Advanced Studies with Einstein. Mitrani was working on government systems, types of federalism. He came up with a kind of solution how to get countries to make a peace architecture that would not mean they subsume all their sovereignty, but they gradually build trust. And that proposal was what underlaid the intellectual foundations of the European Union founders, Jean Monnet and the others. But also philosophers and intellectuals got excited. People like Denis de Rougemont, who wrote a book about love in the history of Europe and who traced love back to the Cathar idea of the troubadours, the love of souls, which you get in Romeo and Juliet. You know, love transcends the physical stuff. It's not about sex only. It's about the passion between souls, which goes beyond life. That's at the heart of European civilization, according to Denis de Rougemont. And I agree with him. You know, we are a continent which was founded and based on love. If you read the great founding epic of Europe, which I call Homer's epic, the Odyssey and the Iliad, you know, it's the war and then the aftermath. You leave the war. You go home to your love. And that story of Odysseus going home to Penelope is the story of the European man in search of home, in search of peace. And yes, that search for love is at the core of our identity. And the other story is that of Europa herself, who's a Phoenician princess, kidnapped by Zeus, the great sort of male, energy. But he no doubt falls in love with her, and then takes her to Crete. And then Agenor, the king of Phoenicia, sends out his other children to go and look for Europa. And one of them is called Cadmus. Now Cadmus is the one that ends up in Greece, looking for his sister, Europa. He's gone the wrong way, she's in Crete, he thinks she's in Greece. And he doesn't find her, but what he does is he founds Thebes. This is a foundational myth of European civilization. Cadmus founds Thebes and brings the alphabet for the first time to Europe. The Greek alphabet, which becomes the foundation of, the Phoenician alphabet, which then becomes the foundation of the Greek alphabet, which then becomes the foundation of the Latin and all the other alphabets, the Slavic and all the rest. All descend from that Phoenician alphabet, which Cadmus brings. And it's very interesting, archaeologists discuss it, doing digs at Thebes in the Acropolis, the highest part of the town, have actually found Phoenician little cylinder seals with Phoenician alphabet written on from exactly the right kind of time, 900 BC type time, when the first Phoenician alphabet was coming into what we would call the Greek cultural milieu. In fact, it was Phoenician and Greek. So one of my heroes, another foundational hero of European thought, is Pythagoras. He was half Phoenician and half Greek. His father was a Phoenician. The mother was a Greek from Samos, the island. So this is why he had this restless search for absolute truth. He was a borderline person between the Semitic world and the Greek world. So why are we leaving all this richness of culture? Why is Britain suddenly deciding that it wants to go off? Well, because it's been hijacked as a state by a bunch of narrow-minded bigots who haven't got, the brains to realise what they're losing. And they cobble together a document that's so illiterate that it doesn't even mention the word culture. It doesn't even mention the word art. For God's sake, I'd give this like a D- as a teacher. Go away. And I think the British people should reject this document. The Parliament should vote it out. The Parliament should vote down this Prime Minister and her cabinet. They're a bunch of incompetent fanatics who there's a certain type of ignorance that is loving. If the heart is developed, it doesn't matter how little knowledge you have, you still have a wisdom. And people who are ignorant but heart-centered and who love knowledge will then be able to say, thank you, I didn't know that. They can receive new knowledge. But people who are ignorant but also egotistical and their hearts are puffed up and arrogant, full of pride, they're unteachable. And I'm afraid this cabinet are like that. I did meet Theresa May and I've spoken to her and I'm afraid I've begun to get the measure of the woman and her husband, who I haven't met. They have an arrogance about them. You can see it when they're operating, when Theresa May's on the parliamentary benches. Her rudeness to Jeremy Corbyn and to the Labour Party. Jeremy isn't the brightest of politicians, but his heart is good. And he deserves respect. And so do the SNP and the Liberal Democrats and all the opposition. I think there should be a second referendum on Brexit, and I think there should be a coalition government take charge. I think that the moderate Conservatives who realise that this direction is absurd, this fanatical Brexit, is against the best interests of the UK as a whole. And the more Theresa May jumps up and says, no, this is in the interests of the country, she doesn't, with all due respect, have a clue what she's talking about. She's never lived in Scotland or Northern Ireland. I'm chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Britain and Ireland. This is very bad news from the people who voted to remain inside the European Union, the majority of people in Northern Ireland. They don't want your Brexit, Miss May, and nor do the people of Scotland. So if you continue to force it down their throats, they will, I think, leave the Union. And I think that would be a progress for them, actually, to come back into the United Ireland and for Scotland to rejoin the European Union as a free nation. So that's the choice. But I can only say this as a philosopher. I have no power, as a friend of mine likes to point out. I'm not a politician. I'm simply a poet and a philosopher and a historian. I can only tell the truth as I see it, and you can find it useful or not. And the final point I want to make here in this brief intervention, having contrasted the beauty of the Macron peace initiative, and that was the finest example of a Europe determined never again to see war, and it was so good to see Angela Merkel there. She gave a very moving speech as the German Chancellor. Again, Germany understands the responsibility that comes from having played a big role in precipitating 2 world wars and the horrors of fanaticism in German history and Nazism and so on. You know, these are not simple matters. So for people like Trump to come along and say nationalism's the answer, you know, they really need to go and do their homework. I ran 30 meetings in the House of Lords back in the 90s and 2000s. I suppose my vision was that we might get some intelligent lords to discuss peace, and we did have some great conversations there. I still think politicians should have to have a license. They should not be able to practice as a politician, like a lawyer can't practice, or I as a teacher can't practice without a qualification, which should be vetted occasionally. And I think politicians should have the same kind of thing. They need to pass a general sort of knowledge, intellectual level of awareness test, and then have a clean license. So if they're found to be lying, they lose the license and can no longer practice as a politician. That's my proposal. I think it would disqualify quite a few of the current members of Parliament and probably other parliamentary bodies around the world, in which case that's fine. Get a new batch in who are actually going to behave ethically and tell the truth. It's as simple as that. Okay, and the same would apply to the European Parliament and any of these other parliamentary bodies in Russia or India or wherever. We'd soon clean up politics if they had to have a license and then had to tell the truth. Okay, so now I want to talk about one final thing, which is what is integration? You know, the British don't understand this project, the European reintegration project. They get terribly terrified. They think federalism, oh, big brother, escape, freedom, piracy, you know, the freedom to be pirates. It's a very, you know, ancient tradition and custom in Britain. What's going on with this project of integration then? I just want to address that. And I want to address it from a spiritual level, because there are two kind of energies. There's integration, a bringing things together, which is what Newton called the centripetal force of physics, actually. There are two forces that operate this universe. There's the centripetal energy, which bring things to a centre, and that's the you know, the blood coming back to the heart. That centripetal movement dynamic is the blood coming back to the heart to be refreshed. Then there's the centrifugal force, which pushes things out into the extremes, into the extremities, which is the heart pumping out the blood into the, you know, all parts, freshly mixed with oxygen. You need both to get the whole heart system working. So in politics, you need both these forces going. Now the centrifugal one is the let's be free, let's be independent, let's break away. That's the American revolutionaries saying, to hell with King George, we want to be free. That's the independence movements. And that's the kind of Brexit movement. We want to be free of Europe. It's a chain. Okay, fine. That's great. We all love freedom, yeah? But then there's the opposite thing, which is duty, which is family, which is love, which is responsibility. So the freedom thing is the teenager going off saying, I'm going to stay up all night. I don't care what my parents say. I'm going to go and party. And then there's the, okay, I better give them a ring. I better just tell them I'm okay, and you know, I'll be back at 2 or whatever. That's the love, responsibility, duty thing, which is the centripetal force going back to the centre, the home. Now, in the history of European thought, we have both are represented, and both can be good in moderation if they're balanced. Okay, to have an extreme form of one is unbalanced. It's like trying to hop around on one foot. You need a right and a left leg. So I think that British metaphysicians and philosophers on the whole have emphasised too much the freedom one, the let's break away, let's be independent. In Europe, there's a different intellectual tradition which I've been exploring and just come across really by coming to live here. And I'm talking at the intellectual level. I'm particularly interested in 18th century intellectual history, the Enlightenment period. I'm interested in esoteric occult movements at that time. As some of you know, that's one of my abiding passions. And in the Masonic and intellectual esoteric movements in 18th century Britain, it was all about freedom and we'll be the heroic nation that discovers X, Y, Z and becomes the first. There was a different kind of move in Europe, and it's associated with a particular interesting man, a Freemason most people have never heard of, called Martinez de Pasquale, who lived from 1715 to 1774. He was a theurgist and theosophist, and he was active as a tutor and initiator of another student of his, Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin, and another one called Jean-Baptiste Willemotz, who was a very important Freemason. And these three were originators of an esoteric current in European and French thought called Martinism, which is still active to this day and still very important. He was active for 20 years, really, from 1754 to 1774, so just up to the French Revolution time. And he decided that he would work with esoteric Freemasonry to advance his ideals. Now, at that 18th century time, Freemasonry was a kind of initiatory group. Many people joined it to make the world a better place. You would meet interesting people, you could work as a lodge, and you would have your rituals, and then you'd have a banquet, and then you'd have a sort of dance and festival, and it was a social club as well. But Martinez didn't see it like that. He saw it as more important. And he wrote a book which he published in the course of his life. And this book, which was basically called The Reintegration of Spirits, it's got a long French title, sets out a very interesting worldview, and I want to just spend a second on that. It was a Judeo-Christian Kabbalistic worldview. Some people think he was of partly Jewish origin. He was Roman Catholic outwardly. He was Judeo-Christian, right? But he was very interested in the Kabbalah, which is, of course, the esoteric traditions of Judaism, as am I, and the esoteric traditions of Christianity. Because Christ himself was a teacher in that tradition. If you listen to my commentaries on the New Testament, you'll realise that. And the books of Enoch also come from the same tradition, right? So Martinez de Pasquale, in his book, The Reintegration of Spirits, basically says that this creation, this world, is supposed to be a good and wonderful place. It was created by the Elohim, the gods, to be that. And nowadays, new research in, cosmology and astrophysics and the size of the universe is far vaster than Martinez de Pasquale realised, although at that time they were beginning to realise its vastness. I have here a map of the universe from Reader's Digest. This is one of my favourite maps ever, and it shows the galaxies and the pan-galactic clusters and the meta-galaxies up to the entire size of the universe, which is unbelievably vast. It gives the actual measurements, according to the latest science, with infinite numbers of worlds and so on. Now, the Elohim, who created and sustained this vast intergalactic universe of ours, on which we're just one tiny planet, are good. They work for the betterment and advancement of all life beings on all worlds. Something happened in our world. Now, Martinez doesn't fully explain